Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name's Ivana if you're new here, and if you're not, thanks for coming back. Today is Thursday, July the 8th. We've almost made it to Friday, not quite there yet. Earlier this week, we had a story from our own Mike Kaysen, who joins me today, and that story was about the ongoing lawsuit, the ongoing fight over control of the Alabama Democratic Party. Now, this is a story that Mike has been covering for what seems like forever now, but for several years, there has been some drama over the control of that party. So Mike wrote a story earlier this week ahead of a hearing on Tuesday. Now, that hearing was held in federal court, and that was to talk about this lawsuit again between members of the past administration, we'll call it there, the past leadership of the Alabama Democratic Party, and some problems they have with the new leadership. We're going to get into all of that in a minute. Mike also attended a hearing about this again in federal court on Tuesday, and we will go over what happened at that hearing. So Mike, there's a lot to break down here. I know you and I were saying we don't want to play insider baseball here, and we want to try to make this as easy to follow as possible. But to do that, you kind of have to go back a little bit. We have to rewind a little bit to, I believe, at the end of 2018. So why don't you start by telling us what happened at the end of 2018 and what happened with the leadership of the state party?
Okay, thanks for having me, Ivana. Yes, in August 2018, the State Democratic Executive Committee, which is the governing body of the State Democratic Party, and it's a big committee. It's over 250 members. They met in Montgomery, and they re-elected Nancy Worley as party chair, a position she had held since 2013. There was another candidate who was supported by Doug Jones. There was at the time a move to try to replace Nancy Worley, and it had close to half of the membership supported that, I think, but not quite. And Worley prevailed. I think the vote was like 103 to 89. And immediately afterward, there was people opposed to Worley who complained about the way that election was conducted, and they complained to the Democratic National Committee about, just about the procedure, and the DNC found some irregularities, or what they said were irregularities, and they said, do it again, have new elections. And they said, also, the state needs to adopt new bylaws because you don't have any provisions for diversity other than blacks. There's no provisions for LGBTQ or Hispanics or youth, and those need to be part of the bylaws. So Worley and her backers who were in charge, they didn't do this. They didn't meet a couple of deadlines for doing this. This is getting long, so stop me if this is getting too long. But the DNC, the DNC stripped her and the first vice chair, Randy Kelly, of their credentials. And Senator Doug Jones, State Representative Chris England, and others who were supporting changes in the party, they sort of orchestrated this move for the executive committee to meet again. Normally, the chair, Worley, would have to call meetings, but there was a rule that says if you get a certain number to call a meeting, the committee can meet. So the committee met. A little over half the members, Worley and her backers, boycotted the meeting, but it was still an official meeting. They changed the bylaws. Then they came back the next few weeks later and replaced Worley as chair, elected Chris England as chair, replaced Randy Kelly as vice chair. And what was really odd was at the time, Worley and her supporters had sort of dueling meetings with different people there, and they adopted new bylaws, re-elected Worley and Kelly, but those meetings were never recognized. The DNC recognized the reform group with Chris England and his supporters, and he's been the chairman of the party since, and Nancy Worley and her supporters have been out of power.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's why we need to go back, because this lawsuit relates to everything that has happened in that time frame. I'll quickly recap. I have a little makeshift timeline in front of me because you have to kind of break it down on a timeline. August 2018, we've got those first elections you talked about. Nancy Worley is reelected as chair and Randy Kelly as vice chair. about a month later, August 2018, 2 months later, as you called it, and we'll just refer to it as that, the reform group, this other part of the state party comes in, adopts those new bylaws. They have elections without Nancy Worley and her group present. They elect Chris England as the chair of the party. Then Nancy Worley and her crew continues to have their own meetings. So at a point, there was almost two Alabama Democratic parties. They were one party, but there were two factions that had kind of split off and were dueling for control. Now, as you mentioned, the Democratic National Committee, who is essentially kind of the governing body of all of these state committees, right? They recognize the reform group, Chris England's group, the one that was supported by then Senator Doug Jones, as the Alabama Democratic Party. They're the ones that the DNC said, look, they're the party, not Nancy Worley and her supporters. Now, that is, again, that's all happening at the end of 2018, I believe even up into beginning of 2019. So this drama lasts for quite a while, Mike. Now, we know a lawsuit was filed in January. So January 2021. So let's take a minute and let's look at what happened between 2019, the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, when you've got Chris England, who is the chair of the recognized state party. And then you have Nancy Worley, again, her supporters, which include Randy Kelly, which include longtime politician Joe Reed. They were having their own, sorry for my wrinkling of my paper here. They were having their own meetings there. So what happens between 2019 and the beginning of 2021 when this lawsuit is officially filed?
Well, it all kind of was put on hold. And the actual change, Chris England was elected chair, and I think it was November. It was November 2019, so it was late 2019 when these changes happened. And then the state had elections, and England began functioning as the party chair, and the party hired all new staff. And so there was a changeover in the leadership and organization of the party. The executive committee didn't meet last year. So the dispute kind of simmered in the background. Although people who were opposed to those changes, I don't think they ever really conceded. I know they never conceded that this was a legitimate change, although Chris England has been the party chair, and the party has continued to function under this new leadership. So nothing much happened last year,
Which kind of, sure. when you look at it on that timeline, that's kind of fair. A lot of things didn't happen in 2020, right? I know some of you kind of refer to it as the lost year in sense of formal functions and things of that nature. So we kind of had that lost year there where not much happened, at least legally. So you come into the beginning of the year, we have this lawsuit. It's filed by Randy Kelly, again, who was the vice chair under Nancy Worley at the time, at the end of 2018, and also by a person by the name of Janet May. Now, something I do want to note quickly is that we do not see Nancy Worley's name on this lawsuit. Can you explain that?
I really can't, except that she has just stepped away from this dispute for now. I don't know if she just got tired of it or if she's not involved at this point. I would guess she supports their efforts, Kelly and May's efforts, but she's not a plaintiff in this case.
So Randy Kelly, Janet May, the people who, again, were kind of part of the old guard, as we'll say, they filed suit against the now, again, recognized Alabama Democratic Party, the reform group, as we mentioned them earlier. And those people include the Democratic National Committee itself, the chairperson of the committee, and against State Democratic Party Chair Chris England, again, who we have mentioned England here before. So that's the lawsuit. Now, they claim, and this is where we have to go back a little bit further, but they claim, meaning the plaintiffs claim, that those new bylaws in that election that made Chris England the chairman of the party violates a 1989 order. And they say, look, you can't have these new bylaws because of what we decided in 1989. So, Mike, without getting too in the weeds here, why is that 1989 settlement even relevant in this lawsuit over, again, the two dueling people in the Alabama Democratic Party?
Well, it's hard not to get in the weeds, but I think it's about, and I don't want to speculate on people's motives, but it seems to be about power because the 1989 lawsuit, which was settled there was a consent decree in 91 that settled it. The purpose of that lawsuit was to give blacks representation on the state Democratic Executive Committee that was in proportion to their share of the Democratic voters. More than half of Alabama voters who vote in the Democratic primary are black. But the way the committee was set up, the proportion of members was less than that. So there's a rule to add at-large members to bring that percentage of black representation up. Under the old bylaws, the black members of the committee were the ones who picked those at-large members. The new bylaws spread that authority out so that the entire committee picks those at-large members. The new bylaws also created the diversity caucuses for Hispanics, Native Americans, youth, which is people 35 and under, LGBTQ. So they created other diversity caucuses. So the influence of the Black Caucus on the Democratic Committee was diminished. You could argue that it was diminished to an extent. At least that's the argument for the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, is that our power was diluted because we no longer control the selection of those at-large members. That's my best understanding of it.
And that's a good way to break it down. It's essentially about who is picking those members. It's not necessarily about members of diversity, about black members. It's who in that committee, who on the boards and on the caucuses is picking those members. So it really comes down to that. It's not a change in the number. It is a change in the who is choosing. Now, something that's interesting to note here is an attorney for the Chris England, for the DNC and that side, the defendants in this lawsuit, Barry Ragsdale, he had said in your story, he said, none of this is doing anything but helping Republicans. He said, this is not productive, this lawsuit. Now, Mike, this is what is happening in this lawsuit. Tuesday, a federal judge held a hearing. So tell us what happened at that hearing, and are we any closer to a resolution in this case?
No, we're not any closer to a resolution because the hearing was over. What the plaintiffs, Randy Kelly and Janet May, are asking to do is to go back into that 1989 lawsuit and hold up the settlement of that lawsuit and say these new bylaws violate this settlement, and they want the judge to essentially reopen that case and then file a contempt of court motion saying these new bylaws are invalid because they violate this federal court order, which is still in effect. So the Judge Huffaker, he's got to decide whether to allow them to intervene in that case. He said he would probably rule in a few weeks. He's given more time to file some briefs and so forth. Even if he rules, no, you can't intervene, which the Chris England side says is the proper ruling, they can still come back and file a lawsuit. Janet May, Randy Kelly, and others can still come back and file a lawsuit challenging the bylaws. So I don't know that it's going to resolve the case whichever way Judge Huffaker rules. So this could go on indefinitely.
Do we know what the end game for this lawsuit is? What the point of this is, other than, again, the control of the party? Do we know if there's any sort of tangible end game to this?
I think it's just control of the party, because I don't think as far as issues, as far as whether whichever side's in control is not going to change the positions of the Democratic Party on the major issues of the day. I think it's just about who gets to pick the members of the executive committee, and when you can pick who's on the executive committee, you can pick who's the chairman. So if you control those at-large positions on the executive committee, if you can screen the people who hold those positions, then you can have a big sway on who's elected chairman, which is what people said happened when Nancy Worley was reelected. On the other hand, adding all the diversity committees to the state committee, LGBTQ, Hispanic, so forth, that added members, who then elected Chris England as chairman. So that changed the equation too. It's, one of the big arguments for Chris England and the DNC was that there was a real shortage of young people on the committee. And they said it's very important that this youth caucus on the committee is important. And they've also pointed out that 80% of those members are Black. So
that's
just some of the dueling arguments going on, but it's really about power. Yeah, I would say it's about power and
power, an argument over years in the making here, and that is not an exaggeration. Literally years in the making, this lawsuit. Mike, we know that you are going to be covering it through and through, and we know that that's probably not a short assignment. We know you probably got a long assignment in front of you for that, but we appreciate you coming here and breaking it down for us and kind of taking some of the jargon out of it and trying to make it more relatable for most of us who are not in Montgomery and who are not dealing with this on a regular basis.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Mike, thank you so much. Everybody watching, thank you so much. Have a great Thursday, and we'll see you tomorrow.